In today's video, I wanted to give you my top 5 tips for shooting surf photography in the water. I've been shooting surf photography in the water for the last 12 years or 13 years, and I've sort of wanted to come up with five tips to give you guys to help you if you're starting off, or even if you've been shooting for a while. Hopefully some of these tips might help. And number one, my first tip is to have a checklist. Like I have now I have a mental checklist of all the things I have to look at when I go shooting. Most of the time before I go shooting, the night before, I'll get my camera, make sure the battery's in there, make sure the battery's full, check the memory card, make sure it's formatted, run through the autofocus settings to make sure they're the optimum for what I'm shooting the next day. Frame rate, yeah, everything like that. Make sure check your housing and make sure your housing's clean, make sure that it's dry inside the housing port, all that kind of stuff. If you want some suggestions on what you should be checking before you go out shooting, let me know and comment below, and I'm going to try and put a list together so I can, and if you guys message me, I'll send you a copy of stuff that I go through before I go shooting. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is to avoid your housing fogging up or condensation forming on the lens port. And to do that, the idea is when you put your housing together with your camera inside, you should be putting it together in the same similar environment or conditions that you're going to be shooting in. So here at home, we have the aircon inside, and outside it's really hot and muggy. So when I go shooting, I definitely don't put my housing together inside. I wait till I go to the beach, and then I pull all my housing apart and put my camera in and make sure there's some air flowing through the housing and lens port, so it's sort of the same. Inside the housing is the same temperature as outside, and that helps you avoid fogging up. And also make sure there's no water inside the housing. So just even before you leave the house, if it looks like there's a little bit of drops inside the housing, get a tissue or something that can absorb all the water, because you definitely don't want any water inside your housing. Tip number 3, my third tip this is a tip for if you're shooting with anything except a fisheye. So if you're shooting with a 20mm, 30mm onwards, hopefully you're using a flat port instead of a dome port. So with a flat port, you should be shooting through a dry port, so there's no water on the lens port when you're shooting. To get all the water shedding off your lens port, you should either be using turtle, like a car wax, or unscented candle wax. And there's a good video on this on the YouTube site for Aquatech. Aquatech run through how they put candle wax on the lens port and buff it off. And I'll also, at the end of this video, I'm also going to jump in the water and video myself doing the same thing, so I can show you how it works. Fourth tip I have is something that I've only been using for the last few years, and that is the histogram. When you're previewing your photos, there's an option to include the histogram. I find this really useful when I'm out shooting, mostly in the middle of the day, because in the middle of the day, when you look at review the pictures when you're chimping, so when you take a photo and then you have a look at the picture to review the exposure, in the middle of the day it's real reflective. When I first started out, I used to think, the pictures are so dark, I'll increase the exposure by decreasing the shutter speed or whatever, and it ends up being overexposed, the pictures, when I get back and have a look on the computer. So I think using the histogram lately, I use it pretty much all the time now. When I take a photo, the histogram will show up, and I'll be able to gauge whether the photo is underexposed, overexposed, and whether or not the highlights are clipping or the blacks are touching the edge. If you don't know too much about the histogram, Matt Granger on YouTube does a good video on the histogram. It's not the perfect way to gauge your exposure, but if you check out his video, it's called "Do You Understand Your Histogram?" and he runs through the the histogram, how it works and how you should use it. And so I think when you're in the water, it's a good idea to, on the preview of the pictures, to have the histogram on the side as well, so you can have a look at that. My last tip is to pretty much just clean your housing. Every time you use your housing, you should be washing it with fresh water, which means washing the outside, pressing the buttons when you're washing it through fresh water to get all the salt water out of your housing and stop it corroding. Even though it's a simple tip, it's pretty important because it helps your housing last. Oh no, your housing can last forever if you wash it properly. So my original housing I had for, I think, over 7 years, and the current one I've had it for at least 5 years. So it's super important, but really easy tip. I'm going to go to the beach this afternoon, and I'm going to run through how I wax my lens port, and I'll also show you how I take a picture and review the histogram and how it looks on the back of the camera. That is it. Yeah, I used unscented candle wax, and yeah, I just put like a couple of strokes. Yeah, just use the cloth and just, yeah, so just like that. So when you first get in the water, always make sure that everything's sealed up properly. So just give it a quick test. Make sure the lens port's on. Don't fall over. Dunk it in. And make sure it's not leaking, so it's fine. But yeah. That was my top 5 tips for shooting surf photography in the water. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, and if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and stay tuned for another video next Monday. See ya.